Happiness is a loaded term. When people say they want to be happy, it can mean a variety of things. Often it will be pointed out that, you know, simply seeking pleasure and avoiding pain is not the way to a satisfying life. And that instead, we need to pursue meaningful goals and generate a sense of purpose through struggle. But then others will point out that a life of painful struggle is only worthwhile if at some point you actually enjoy yourself, right? If you're just constantly in agony, what is the point? Now, this debate between the hedonist and the ascetic, the slothful pleasure seeker and the righteous self denier, is a false dichotomy. Most of us intuitively recognize this, right? We realize that while it would be fun momentarily to eat a whole chocolate cake, there would be consequences not only for our digestion the next day, but for our view of ourselves as people who care about health and nutrition. And similarly, we probably have big goals that we know will require hard work and trade offs. But we also realize that the narrow minded, lifelong pursuit of a single goal at the expense of everything else is a recipe for loneliness and a lack of fulfillment. Now, what most of us mean intuitively by happiness is neither of these extremes, but a balanced life of flourishing and physical health. We want financial success, but also loving relationships. We want to indulge in a night out every so often, but we also want to save for retirement and make intelligent investments for our future selves. We want to have an exciting, meaningful career, but we also want time for leisure and family and relaxation. We want to learn about the world, but we also want to experience it without overthinking. Now, none of this is irrational, none of it's contradictory. The human brain is perfectly capable of this kind of balance, right? It takes but the mere fact that we're capable of it doesn't mean that we'll automatically attain it. It takes work, but not necessarily drudgery. So, like anything you want to achieve, it helps to understand the mechanism by which it's realized. So, in this case, in the case of flourishing and happiness, it helps to understand the factors that tend to allow humans to achieve it, to study those characteristics that happy people have in abundance, and to figure out how to build those in yourself. Now, contemplative traditions like Buddhism and Stoicism and others have asked similar questions for millennia. Modern psychology has taken a scientific approach to them, in another vein, right? And these ancient traditions and philosophies obviously have a lot to offer us. And this is reflected in the fact that not only do modern people consume the literature written thousands of years ago, but also that psychologists and neuroscientists have often studied the benefits of particular practices derived from those ancient traditions. But the advantage that science has is that it cuts to the heart of what we care about. It can help answer questions like, what's the payoff for you? Is it worth doing this practice and for how long? Can this particular practice be trained? And what are the most effective ways of training it? Now, the disadvantage of the scientific approach is that it's slow and generalized. The careful nature of the scientific method means that discoveries and significant results often take a long time to emerge, which means that many potentially beneficial practices will remain unverified. On the other hand, because psychology and neuroscience deal with human beings rather than mindless atoms or inanimate matter, the results are always characterized by a somewhat low signal to noise ratio. There's a lot of variability, right? Statistical methods can help researchers figure out what makes a difference across the whole sample. But that means that they're often leaving out what happens to a given individual. We're sometimes missing the trees for the forest. So anytime someone tells you that practice X doesn't have any effect according to science, should be a little bit skeptical, right? Sometimes this is absolutely true and you shouldn't bother with trying. If, as a crazy example, if someone tells you it would be beneficial for your long-term health to get addicted to drugs, especially dangerous drugs, they're just wrong, right? It's science is pretty clear that that will not lead to any kind of flourishing. But on the other hand, if someone tells you that your favorite type of meditation or visualization or emotion regulation technique has no effect according to the science, you should be skeptical, right? If something works for you, if it makes you more calm or joyful or motivated, then how much does it matter if the results were statistically significant in a large sample? Now, we have to temper that idea with the fact that it is very easy to fool ourselves. So it's worth at least experimenting with not doing that thing, right? And looking into the science. But I'm also not saying that anything you happen to believe is true because it feels true to you, right? For example, praying to God might make people feel a sense of purpose, motivation, peace, hope, confidence. But that doesn't mean necessarily or logically that God exists or that he actually heard your prayers, right? A simpler explanation is that prayer is a kind of thinking and setting of intentions that allows you to bypass your mind's usual objections. It may be that the belief that God is listening to your prayers helps some people's brains to just enact the emotional changes they seek because they're not listening to their inner critic, you know, something like that. My point with all of this is that the only way to verify whether something works for you to make you happier is to do it and assess the results within your own mind. Now, you have to take a long enough time horizon, right? With things like meditation and journaling techniques and many other practices, this means doing it on a daily basis or whatever the frequency is for a few weeks at least before you make a conclusion. You have to gather enough data and give your brain time to adapt and change, right? The other thing is that psychology and neuroscience will give you reliable clues to what will work and how effective it may be. But it can neither rule out what hasn't been tested nor invalidate your experience of what works specifically for you, given all the caveats I just mentioned. Now, the final point here, just because something works for you, that doesn't mean it will work for everyone or most people, right? That's what science is good at. It's if you find some practice, something weird like chanting your name 100 times every morning and it makes you feel better, that's great for you, right? But if you then claim that everyone should do this, that you've discovered some way to enhance self-esteem, science can easily assess that claim and most likely prove it wrong. So personal experience is not easily generalized. Okay, so I have this preamble because in this spirit, right, in everything I just mentioned, I want to talk about a couple of sections from a 2020 review article, which was titled "The Plasticity of Well-Being: A Training-Based Framework for the Cultivation of Human Flourishing" by Cortland J. Dahl, Christine D. Wilson-Mendenhall, and Richard J. Davidson, and it was published in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences. You can find the reference to that study in the description of this video. Now, that article presents 4 dimensions of well-being that can be strengthened through intentional training. It's very helpful because it treats well-being as a skill rather than an immutable trait. Now, this is a great paper. The authors touch on neuroscience, clinical psychology, positive psychology research, and to explain and verify their claims. It's readable and interesting, so I definitely recommend you check it out. Now, just to mention them, the 4 dimensions that are identified by the authors are awareness, insight, connection, and purpose. Now, I'm not going to do a whole summary of this article. I just want to touch on 2 of these. So awareness and connection. In doing so, right, I'll be drawing heavily on the paper that I just mentioned, but also on related research, some background knowledge, and kind of my own view of why these are so important. So let's begin with that first one, awareness. So, why is this important? Well, awareness involves being fully present and attentive to both your environment and internal experiences, like thoughts and emotions. So, in general, high awareness allows for better focus, better deployment of attention and self-control. So the authors define this as a heightened and flexible attentiveness to perceptual impressions in one's environment, as well as internal cues such as bodily sensations, thoughts, and emotions. So I think this relates very closely to distraction. So distraction, we hear it often that it's the enemy of productivity, right? And that is true, right? You can't get much done when you're just being pulled to all kinds of different distractions. But it's also an enemy of satisfaction. So it's kind of a cliche at this point to say that we live in an age of distraction. But there's really something to that claim, right? We really do have no shortage of distractions, social media, email, texting, and YouTube. But people often use this fact as an excuse to not focus, to not be fully aware and present. Like it's like they're at the mercy of whatever notification happens to pop up next. Now, I certainly find myself wasting valuable time on all these distractions, but the truth is that distraction is or often or we can make it into a choice. And what do I mean by that? So on some level, your phone buzzes in your pocket, you hear the sound of a new text or whatever, and your brain is drawn to that, right? You can't help that. It's going to notice that. But then there's a moment of decision, right? Do we pull the phone out of our pocket? Do we tap that notification icon? Do we go down that path? Or do we just return to our objective, to our object of focus? Now, obviously, we want to make that decision to return to what we're focusing on, to what's important, to what we actually want to stay committed to. And that takes practice, right? One thing that can help, that can make it easier, obviously, is to put your phone away or like set a timer for how long you're going to stay focused for. But this is also where awareness comes in, right? When you're aware of what's going on, not only outside your body, but also within your own brain and body, you can better resist that pull of distraction. Your brain has two main attention networks, the ventral network and the dorsal network. So the ventral network activates when something in your environment or inside your body effortlessly grabs your attention, right? Just like I was talking about, the phone in your pocket or a fire alarm going off or a sharp pain in your stomach, all these things activate that ventral attention network. That's one part of the attention network. The other part, the other network, is the dorsal attention network. And this is activated when you are exerting top-down control over attention, when you're deploying that sustained, focused attention on the task at hand. The dorsal network is also closely related with brain networks that are involved in planning and reasoning and problem solving, that are kind of collectively sometimes called the frontoparietal control system. You might also hear like the executive control network or executive function network, cognitive control networks. These are all closely related. And it involves the prefrontal cortex. That's, the main brain region in those networks. But when your phone buzzes, when your ventral attention network is helplessly activated, right, and drawn to it, that's true, but your brain then decides whether it should stay focused on the task at hand or instead shift to your phone. In either case, once you decide, you're using that dorsal attention network, right? You're staying focused on either the thing that you want to stay focused on, the report you're writing, the work that you're doing, the person that you're talking to, or you are now using that attention for scrolling, shorts or looking at your email or whatever. Now, that's kind of the basis, but the question is, what do you want to use that dorsal attention network for? And there are ways to train our awareness so we can recognize when we're getting distracted. And there are ways to train our ability to remain focused for long periods of time. Now, it's beneficial to train both of these, right? So, first, training awareness itself. There are different ways of doing this, but one is through mindfulness practices. So, mindfulness meditation in particular forces you to simply notice what is happening in your experience. And I mean that literally, right? You take 20 minutes to just sit there and notice how the breath feels, how the sensations in your body feel, and the thoughts that pass in and out of consciousness. And it's about non-judgment and not getting distracted. That's kind of distraction. I think Sam Harris has said this before. Distraction is like the opposite of what you're doing in mindfulness. You're ceasing to be distracted. Now, doing this every day, right, on a consistent basis for at least 20 minutes of time has been shown to enhance awareness and give you more space to choose whether you want to shift your focus or not. And that is really what mindfulness meditation is. It is continually making that choice to come back to just noticing what's happening. It's not really about focus, it's about awareness and non-distraction. So on the other hand, focus, right? Training that sustained attention. This can be accomplished through meditation, right? There are ways that there are actually different types of meditation. What I was just talking about was called open monitoring meditation. Then there's others called focused attention meditation. But I would say the truth is that the best way to train your focus is to challenge yourself to stay attentive to stay focused in the real world, in real world situations, especially on things that don't intrinsically interest you. We can all stay interested in a fun game that we're playing. We can all stay focused on. We can all, watch TV and have no problem staying focused on that because it's intrinsically interesting to us. But if you're working on something boring, right, that's a really good opportunity to practice. So I did this. One way that I did this in college was to set a timer. I still do this actually, but set a timer for yourself and don't let yourself get distracted during that time. Now, what I've changed between colleges now is expanding that window of focus over time. I started out with a 25-minute timer, right? I had issues with staying focused. So 25 minutes, and you can even start shorter, 15 minutes, and then take like a short break and then go to another period of intense focus and slowly expand that window of time. And you can get into the, number of hours, right? There may be an upper limit to this, but the point is to actually train focus in real life. So the ability to focus is related to what is often known as, or often referred to as, the flow state, right? We've all probably experienced this. It's that deeply enjoyable state of mind where you are completely absorbed in the task at hand, undistracted, right? And where each action seems to arise naturally and effortlessly from the last. So athletes often experience this, as does pretty much anybody who has a passion for a physically or cognitively demanding activity. You might experience it while writing or drawing or playing guitar, mountain biking, climbing, running, playing video games, solving math problems, building a cabinet, or anything else where you have clear goals, rapid feedback on your performance, and a sense of joy in what you're doing, right? That intrinsic motivation for that thing. So clear goals, rapid feedback, and kind of intrinsic motivation for the thing. That's when it's most likely to arise. And I've found, at least in my own life, that training my powers of focus allow me to more easily enter and stay in the flow state despite potential distractions. Now, important as awareness and focused attention are for well-being, they primarily involve just you, right? Just the individual. So usually when you're focused on something, it's a solitary activity, right? And similarly, being aware of your thoughts and feelings is fundamentally about being alone with your own mind. But we all know that when it comes to happiness, the purely solitary life is never the path to flourishing. So that's why I want to talk about the second dimension of well-being identified by the authors of that paper I mentioned earlier, connection. So the the definition offered by the authors of connection is, quote, a subjective sense of care and kinship toward other people that promotes supportive relationships and caring interactions, end quote. Okay, so tons of research, right, and just common sense point to an enormous role that supportive and caring relationships have in human well-being. Studies have found that loneliness leads to depression and anxiety, and in some cases, even psychosis. Right? Now, these are related to detrimental changes in the brain that occur from prolonged loneliness, including in the hippocampus. Some studies have even found a shrinking of areas of the hippocampus, although not a ton of research on that, and changes to the prefrontal cortex. Now, the authors of that study note, the study I mentioned earlier, this paper, that one way to strengthen our feelings of connection with other people is to focus on shared characteristics and traits. So when you meet someone for the first time and you want the best chance of creating a meaningful relationship with that person, it may be helpful to remember that while this person is different from you and they've had different experiences and struggles, they're a human being, right? They're just like you in that sense. And this may seem superficial, but it's a way of kind of mentally bringing that person into your tribe, into your circle of concern. Now, to contrast this, if you focus on what makes them different from you, that connection will be harder. It's important to recognize everybody has a unique experience and outlook, right? But at the same time, remembering that this person is a lot like you is equally important. They want love and prosperity and health and joy just like you. Now, recently, and I've been doing this for a while, but I've really started to notice it in my recent experience that an even more powerful way of fostering a sense of connection with people, especially those you care about, is to remember that you actually want them to thrive. So this relates to a practice called loving kindness meditation. So loving kindness meditation is also known as metta. It's an ancient Buddhist practice that's aimed at fostering feelings of compassion and shared joy. And I have begun to practice it every day. And I've really found that my relationships with my wife, with my friends, and my family feel deeper and more meaningful. Now, this practice, there's research behind it, but what it involves is deliberately bringing to mind someone you care about and then wishing that person well by mentally repeating phrases like, may you be happy and may you be healthy. But it's crucial to not only repeat those phrases, but to savor those feelings of goodwill, of kindness, of gratitude, and the joy of imagining the happiness of others. Just for a second, just think about someone that you really, really care about, someone that matters to you. And think about how it feels when you see that person happy, right? When you see them coming out of a struggle and achieving something great or simply smiling, like that feels good. And there's a way to nurture that kind of feeling and make it more likely to arise in real social situations. And a powerful way of doing that is through loving kindness meditation. Okay, I know this may sound soft or woo woo or whatever, but there is real evidence that backs up the efficacy of this practice. It really does enhance compassion and well being, at least to some extent. And again, this is one of these things that you have to try out for a while, preferably on a daily basis with like a guided meditation. Someone who's kind of an expert in this can really guide you through it in a better way than what I just sort of casually described now. And you have to do it for a while, frequently, you know, over time to see if it actually works for you. Now, on just a more practical level, right? It's important to consciously build your relationships with people you actually want to spend time with. I think all of us have probably found that once you're out of school, once you're not in school anymore, friendships are harder to come by and people tend to spread out geographically. So, like anything worth attaining, you have to do the work to make those connections and strengthen them. You have to reach out to friends and spend time with your loved ones and put yourself out there. Go to physical places and talk to people, right? Plan those things into your life and be in the company of good people. You have to take steps, even if they're just baby steps. And like I was mentioning, focusing on shared traits and listening and being present and being honest and compassionate. And that's where, when I just mentioned being present and listening, it's so important to train awareness and focus to actually build those connections and make better relationships in your life. And once you have that small community or a big community, whatever it is, cherish the individuals and build your connection with all of them. This is not easy. It's much harder for some people than others, and I want to acknowledge that. And I know, like I've had difficulty with it too, especially being like a remote worker. It can be especially difficult. But given that central role that connection plays in human well-being, this may be one of the most important things you can do in your life. Now, just some interesting neuroscience around this is that we all kind of feel in an intuitive or philosophical sense that our friends and loved ones become part of us. Now, one fascinating neural correlate of human connection is something called neural synchronization. And this is a measure of how much two people's brains kind of resemble each other during a conversation. So the brain activity kind of comes to resemble that of your conversation partner. But the thing is that this seems to correlate with how well I understand what you're saying and how well we're conveying uh, information when we're talking to each other. Um, that's just an interesting correlate. I think it's something kind of cool to keep in mind when you're in a conversation with somebody. Your brains are kind of syncing up in this way. Now, the bottom line is that our brains thrive when we have deep, positive, and long-lasting relationships with others. So as a species, our bodies, we're soft and vulnerable. Human beings are not, we don't have claws and large teeth to defend ourselves with. But somehow we've become an incredibly successful species in evolutionary terms. And partly that's due to our big cerebral cortex, right? That lends us this greater intelligence than any other species. But the other half of that explanation is our social nature, our ability to cooperate in large groups, to communicate, to have symbolic language, to combine our intelligences and solve problems together. So it was probably almost certainly very important for our ancient ancestors to bond with one another, not only through mating and romantic relationships, but also friendships and forming that goodwill for members of the tribe. Now, the point of all this is that we have an incredible ability to connect with other humans. despite superficial barriers that may present themselves. That includes race and personal history and gender and so on. And we should nurture this ability through recognizing our shared humanity and what makes us more similar rather than different. But all this comes down to everything I've talked about so far comes down to a statement. Happiness is not easy. But there are tangible skills that we can build that will make it easier. If we give some time to fostering awareness and focus and our capacity for connection with others, it's likely that our lives will get better. The human mind is complex, but often the solutions to our internal problems are simple. And I think this is true for many of our dissatisfactions with life. If we learn to connect with the moment, with the present moment that we inhabit, and the people we encounter, we will find that life does not always have to be so hard. Now, earlier I mentioned this idea of neural synchronization. So, again, this is this fascinating way that our brains function when we're in conversation with others. And I didn't talk too much about it, but there are actually some ways you can kind of enhance this form of synchronization. So, if you want to learn more about that, check out my video on neural synchronization. But in any case, thank you so much for watching. I'll catch you next time.